Welcome to the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. My name is Katie Dodd, and I'm a nutrition entrepreneur. I spent 7 years as a side hustler before diving into entrepreneurship full time. Before making the leap, I was bringing in 6 figures through my side hustle. If I can do it, you can too. This podcast is for dietitians, interns, and students who want to be inspired to start or perfect the side hustle of their dreams. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the 255th episode of the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. Don't be afraid to pivot. I am so excited to invite today to the podcast Maggy Doherty. Maggy is a registered dietitian who runs Maggy the Dietitian. She provides nutrition counseling services to clients, but also business coaching and supervision. She's got a really fun story, a really big heart, and I am just so excited, Maggy, to have you here today to share a little bit more with the Dietitian Side Hustle community.
Thanks,
So,
Katie. I'm excited to hang out with you.
so I've got some questions that we're just going to dive right into. And my first question is really getting to know you a little bit more, your journey. So the first question is tell us more about yourself and your journey to private practice and coaching and all the things.
As I was looking at this question, it's so perfect for, being on a podcast all about side hustle. And when I looked back at my journey, I mean, it's just been like a side hustle after another side hustle that's turned into something else. And really, as far back as I can remember getting into nutrition, when I was in college, I was a student athlete at UCLA. I was on the women's diving team. And they always say, student athlete, student comes first and then athlete. But the reality is all of my time was in athletics. And so I didn't realize what I wanted to do for my career until diving ended. The day I had my last dive, I started an Instagram account called Nutritious Foodie. And I just started posting pictures and recipes and random stuff. And I realized that was like my very first side hustle. It was my senior year in college, just like starting this Instagram account. And then I had realized I wanted to become a dietitian, went to, had to move back home, get all my prereqs because I majored in communications and urban planning, which isn't super helpful when you want to be a dietitian. And so when I went to grad school, I continued to build out this little Instagram side hustle and I turned it into a website, which turned into a blog, which turned into writing food reviews. And I remember peanut butter company, the peanut butter brand had like just started out and they sent me like buckets of peanut butter and I did like a taste test, wrote a blog about it. Pop chips was just getting started. They sent me bags and bags of pop chips, wrote reviews, and really kind of got into blogging and writing. And then I got into Upwork, had some more side hustles there where I did a lot of freelance stuff as a nutritionist because I wasn't a dietitian yet. And then I was had all these other random side hustles where like I did the social media for a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. I would go, I was writing on the Thrillist and doing lots of blogging for other websites. And in grad school, I had like 5 different side hustles between like my Instagram, my website, writing, this coffee shop. Ended up writing a cookbook. And so I always knew I loved to dabble in a bunch of different things. And so when I graduated, I got my first job at Parkland Hospital in downtown Dallas, full time being a clinical dietitian, and just still needed to get my fill. And so I was still working on Upwork. I still had Nutritious Foodie. I was still posting there. So even in my first job, I continued to have these side hustles, not really for money, but just for my creative side. And then I realized this Nutritious Foodie was becoming a brand, which then grew into Doherty Nutrition. And so after about 2 years working in the corporate world, I realized I could not clock in and clock out anymore. I could not see, back to back to back to back patients. I couldn't follow the rules. And I always knew I wanted to do my own thing. And so in May of 2019, I started Doherty Nutrition, which, this side hustle turned into a private practice. And it was just me, myself, and I. So very much your typical dietitian who starts a private practice on their own and is just figuring out all these things. And certain things went well. And then I hired my friends from the hospital, hired my friends from grad school. And then fast forward several years, the company now is a team of 40 people. And so this side hustle is now a very thorough business that's built out. And I kind of realized that same thing where my side hustle's gone. This is kind of a business and company. So I left Doherty Nutrition after about 5 years and started my next side hustle. So as I look back at my journey, it's really been side hustle after side hustle. Certain side hustles grow into a private practice and become a real thing. So that's where I'm at today after dabbling in a few side hustles.
I love that. And I think that's how a dietitian can tell that they have the entrepreneurial spirit. They just find themselves dabbling in all these side hustles. And as you're listing those, like, oh, I remember my Upwork days. I mean, obviously I'm very into blogging, but I love that
Uh-huh.
journey. And I love one thing that you said, and I hope that students who are listening to this heard Maggie share all of the cool side hustles she was doing and ways she was making money before she was a dietitian. So often I hear students who think I have to be a registered dietitian before I can do X, Y, and Z. And the truth of the matter is, no, you can do what you want. Of course, stay in, scope of practice, all of that. But
Hmm.
there's so many ways that students listening, you guys can be side hustlers too. And then once you get that RD, it just, opens doors for even more opportunities. So,
Yes.
so yeah, I love that story and that journey that you've been on and continue to be on. So I know you've done lots of things, and with that have been lots of pivots. And this is really
Yes.
kind of the point of the podcast. Like, don't be afraid to pivot. So, can you share? I know in the question I put all, but we have time
Hmm.
limits. But share some of the highlights of points in your business that you had to pivot.
There's been so many pivots. And when I think back at them, like, what are the most instrumental ones in my journey or the most recent ones that led me to right here? And I think back to three really monumental pivots over the past about 2 years. And the first pivot was letting go of my first side hustle, my first baby, Doherty Nutrition, kind of what I grew from the ground up. And that first pivot was happened back in November and December of 2023. And I had decided to take a leave from Doherty Nutrition and kind of step back. I had trained my dietitians how to see patients, or clients. I trained my dietitians on how to manage dietitians. I trained the operations team on how to do this. And a lot of my role had begun to get outsourced. So I love website. I love branding. We hired a company to do that. I love marketing. I love social media. We hired a dietitian to do that. I love seeing clients hire dietitians to do that. So I realized all of my roles kind of got outsourced. So I kind of felt like this emptiness, and I wasn't getting this fill, this fix, this happiness, this fulfillment. I knew something was not right. And so I took a break. I stepped away. And during that time, I realized, one, I didn't miss it, which was sad in a way, but I didn't miss it because the whole point of a business is to become replaceable. But when you are replaceable in a business, it doesn't feel very good. And so I stepped away. The business kept going. I was like, at one end, I was so proud of the business. And the other end is like, I'm not needed. So what do I do now? And then I wasn't working as a dietitian. I was depressed. It was tough. And it was like this breakup where like you miss this person that you know you shouldn't be with. Um, but stepping away gave me the closure to know I needed to pivot and I needed to become an entrepreneur again. I was an entrepreneur. I built a business and then I was no longer an entrepreneur because I had grown those roles at that company. And so I think that was really the big first pivot is like stepping away. And it was really bittersweet. And then that next pivot was, gosh, now that I'm not working at this business I grew, what do I want to do now? And like very naturally, I'm like, I want to start my own thing. And I don't really want to build a business that I can become replaceable. I want to be an entrepreneur, which led me to create a business called Maggie the Dietitian because there's just one Maggie the Dietitian. And so it was that pivot of going from solo to group and then group back to solo. And I got to be an entrepreneur again. I got to build the website. I got to create my brand. I got to see clients. And as I started this company, that the third pivot was, okay, I thought I would do some nutrition counseling as an eating disorder specialist. I thought I would do diving nutrition and do diving sports nutrition tops to teams. And then I thought I would do maybe some business coaching for clinicians, maybe some eating disorder supervision. And I only started my business last year, May of 2024. And then the next pivot was, okay, which of these things are actually working? And then the business coaching for dietitians really took off. So then I pivoted from marketing nutrition counseling, marketing eating disorders, marketing supervision to just business coaching. And that last pivot's kind of where I've landed the past 12 months. And it's been really neat to, niche down to these things and then further niche down to this like one lane and see that work. So I think those are the three biggest pivots really over the past 2 years of letting go of my business, starting my own thing again as an entrepreneur, and then seeing what works and what doesn't work in my business again.
I love that little story, and I like the three that you highlighted. And one thing I heard you say over and over again was, I thought I would. And I
I
think that's
thought,
something important to hone into, because so often when we get into the side hustle world, the entrepreneur world, we think we know what it's going to look like. And maybe it will, but most likely it will not. So a lot of pivoting is trusting the journey and understanding that, like, this is where I am now, this is where I want to be, but the journey to get there is going to be different than what I'm expecting. So, another thing that you said that I also wanted to highlight was, you talked about, like, with your first pivot, you mentioned that the fulfillment and happiness wasn't there anymore. And I
mhm.
think that's one of the coolest things about being an entrepreneur, is that we get the ability to build whatever we want. And why not build a business or a side hustle that you're going to love, that's going to leave you feeling fulfilled? And so I
Yeah.
love that you're in this place of, okay, I built this really successful business. On the outside, it looks fabulous, but I feel this thing in me of like, I feel like there's something deeper I need. And that was that cue of, okay, it's another time to pivot.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, the
I
opinion of like don't judge a book by its cover.
yeah,
Of like, hey, it looks like this really big, beautiful, cool, awesome business. And you could assume someone's really happy and fulfilled with it, but you don't always see what's going on behind closed doors.
yeah, yeah. And that's something I really want people hearing to know, that you have permission to pivot. You have permission to pivot if you are not
Absolutely.
fulfilled, if you are not happy. It's not, this will tie into our next question. It's not failure. It's just part of the journey. Maggie's journey, lots of pivots. My journey, lots of pivots. I had no idea what I was in for in 2019 when this podcast launched.
Hmm.
So it's just this, it really is the journey, and embracing it and understanding that pivoting is normal
Yeah.
and should be honestly encouraged. So that leads to our next question. And this, I
So
think, is,
before the next question, I
yes.
wanted to share one quote that I love that you made me think of by James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits,
Love
obsessed with
him.
him.
Yep.
But there's a quote and it says, finding your way in life is like unlocking the combination of a safe. You have to go forwards and backwards. Life is not a direct march from A to B. The twists and turns are progress, not regression. What feels like a setback in the moment is later revealed to have been part of the path all along. Each move was necessary to get to your end goal. And I love that quote because it reminds you, every step back gives you the momentum to move forward and teaches you, okay, you had to go back because going forward at that rate wasn't the right rate for you. So what you said resonated. I was like, oh, I love that quote. I wanted to share that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm like, oh, I need to reread Atomic Habits. So, but I love that analogy of, like, I'm thinking of like the locker in high school, forward, backwards, forwards, and you got to do the right pattern to unlock that sucker. But that's a really good analogy. And I think why some dietitians struggle with the pivot is they think that if I have to pivot, it means that I've failed. And if I failed, then this is bad. And I think so much of what we're almost taught and what people believe is that we have to build a business in a way that we will not fail. And we're setting unrealistic standards for ourselves. And then we beat ourselves up and we're like, oh, this wasn't what the plan was. So I'd love it if you could share what your thoughts are on failure in business.
Just like embracing it. And it's so hard to do in the moment. But honestly, the most important lessons that I've learned in life has costed me a significant amount of time, money, or sanity. And you don't build character during the easy, great, perfect times. You build character when things are really, really freaking hard. You know, I have developed, the characteristic of resiliency through, over the past couple years, I unexpectedly lost my dad. I was pregnant, pivoted in the business, and like that resiliency wasn't built through like handling a lot of good stuff after a good stuff. And one of my favorite quotes is, at the opposite end of success is failure.
Mhm.
And behind every successful person, there is a story of great, great failures. In any person who you may look up to, or who may be an author, motivational speaker, maybe a business coach, a lot of times they lead with that adversity and
Yeah.
turning those bad times into a story. And what I always tell my dietitians is, it is not a mistake as long as you learned something
Yep.
from it. And a lot of the managers I've worked with, or the dietitians I've coached, typically it's when they hire really not great dietitians or have terrible onboarding experience, or something goes really bad, they fine tune their process, they get a protocol, they change it, and then the next hire goes so much better. And so, uh, my thoughts on failure is like, you have to have failure to develop your character, create your business, and figure out if it's worth it to you. Because the same person can be met with the same failure, and one person may choose to overcome it and stay in the situation. Someone else may choose to overcome it by leaving the situation. And neither one's right or wrong, but I think that's how you figure out if the entrepreneurial path is right for you. Because there's going to be failures if you're an entrepreneur. There's also going to be failures if you work in a corporate world. But again, there's a pro and con to each one.
Yes, I love that. I love that perspective. Um, I was listening to this one speaker. His name's Gary Brackett. He's a former NFL player, and he's really kind of in the business mindset area now. And he said on a call that I was on with him, build failure into your business plan. And I thought that was so beautiful because I think so often people are like, I'm going to make a business plan that doesn't fail. But if you understand this is part of the process and part of how you get better, understand you just have to build it into the process. So that way when it happens, you're not like, nope, this is part of the journey. So I love that. So thank you for sharing. Um,
Mhm.
what's something you wish more dietitians wanting to pursue business knew?
I think part kind of ties into what we just talked about, is like knowing your mistakes are going to be your most valuable lessons
Mm,
in business going forward. Um, you know, sometimes, I think back is like, if I could go back and do it all over again, what do I wish I knew? And I struggle with that question because I'm like, would I really want to know anything differently? Because if I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right here with you and
yeah.
been able to, help, you know, coach dietitians who've helped other people, and having this like big downstream effects. It's like, on one hand, I wouldn't go back and I would do everything exactly the same. And on the flip side, if I, I'm working with people who are like, what would I do differently? You know, I, 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 I think having supervision and having someone to process your ideas and thoughts with, I tell all of my dietitians, one, get a therapist. Get a therapist, get a therapist, get a therapist. Just be able to process stuff. And two, my business coach for most of my life was my partner, um, my husband, who was in tech sales. And I think there's so many pros to where, okay, I got advice from someone in a different industry. I think that's so valuable, is getting, supervision from someone who's not an RD, getting business coaching from someone who's not an RD. Um, I love to pull ideas from other industries because it's so, so helpful. So I think there was some pros there. But then there's also some cons. A lot of the business coaching that I'd gotten from him was from males who were paid very, very high in a very analytical environment. And so when we took that concept and applied it to dietitians who don't make buku bucks, they're in this compassion giving field, there was some disconnect. And so it's like, um, I think if I could go back, I'd love to have had someone to process the building a business up that maybe had been there and done that, versus, being with a fellow entrepreneur doing it for the first time together with someone who was my spouse, made for a lot of difficult things. So, one thing I'll tell dietitians too is a lot of dietitians, their business partner is their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their husband, their wife, their best friend. And I coach a lot of people saying, okay, make sure you guys set really, really firm boundaries about when you talk about work outside of work, when you talk about personal stuff inside of personal, and protecting that relationship first. Um, because the business can always be there, the relationship can't. Um, so I guess to sum up, what's one thing I really wish dietitians knew more is you're gonna make mistakes, find the value in it. And two, don't be afraid to get support and process your thoughts with a therapist or a coach or a friend, or be afraid to invest money in your own learning. And if you invest money and it's not worth it, you probably still learn something from it.
Absolutely. So I know you mentioned like the, finding someone who's like been there, done that. I often say that if you have found someone who's doing what you want to do in business, pay them money to learn from them. It's fast tracking really your success. You're going to learn from their successes, but also learn from their failures, learn what not to do. And I remember when
Uh-huh.
I remember when I first invested in my first, it was like a $300 course back in 2019. It wasn't even that much money in perspective of how I see things now. And I remember I had a really good friend who's an entrepreneur tell me, Katie, that person is doing what you want to do. You need to pay them money to show you how to do it. And I'm like, okay. Like, she was my friend, so I said okay. And I took this
Yeah.
course, and I realized I would have done everything wrong had I done it on my own. And from then, I was like, that's when I dove in head first of like, if I want to learn this concept, I need to find the right person to show me how to do it, and that is so valuable.
I
Of
love
course, yeah, yeah. I love what you said about finding a therapist. I myself am in therapy, and I'm a huge advocate for it. I think,
Shout out to therapy.
yep, yep. It's just one of those things. I feel like it's part of our whole health, right? It's like physical health, mental health. It's all the things, and I love my
And then as a
therapist.
side hustle entrepreneur, you can expense it as professional development
Right?
or self-learning. So yeah, my therapy is on my business credit card.
Nice.
Best expense that I have.
Love it. And then you actually, one of the first things you said with this question was, your mistakes are your most valuable lessons. And I'm like, that's a beautiful quote. Your mistakes are your most valuable lessons.
Amen.
And I hope what people are taking away from this conversation that we're having today is that the journey of entrepreneurship is just that. It is a journey. And I love that you've been able to share your story about how you have pivoted. And it seems like from everything you've shared, it's like the pivots are what has gotten you to this place where you feel fulfilled and happy. And you've got this business where you're
Hmm.
helping other dietitians and you love it. And
Yeah.
so I hope that people listening, that's their biggest takeaway of like, pivoting is part of the process. You're going to fail, you're going to make
Hmm.
mistakes. Build yourself with the right support system, people, therapists, coaches, teams, all the things, and really just embrace what that journey looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's hard to do that when you're in the slums and in the tough part, but it's, when you get out of it, you're able to look back and see what you learned from it. So I think if you're listening to this right now and like you are hating your job or your side hustle or things are tough or you're losing money and you like this doesn't resonate with you, like just keep hanging on, keep waking up day after day, putting one foot in front of the other. Um, and as you get further out from that insult or that injury, you can look back and see like, oh crap, like I do see what I learned. So I think just knowing when you're in the thick of it, like sometimes you really are in survival mode and you're not able to see the light at the end of the tunnel and knowing like that's okay. That's part of the process too. And I've been there where like you can't see the light in the tunnel or like the light just keeps every step you take forward, the light moves a little bit further away and like I've been in that spot too. And it's not always like rainbows and butterflies all the time. And there's another quote that I love that's, what makes the good times so special. Oh no, the bad times don't last and the good times don't either. And so when you're in those good moments, like that's what makes it so special. It's like that good time is not going to always last. And same thing, like that really cruddy time is not going to last either.
Yeah, there's something weird about our brains where we're hardwired to think that when we're in the cruddy times, they're never going to end. And when we
They're
transition out of the good times, we think, what did I do
gonna be here
wrong?
forever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've gone through lots of ups and downs in my journey. And even though I've worked so much on my mindset, my brain is still very dramatic. When I'm in the downs, I'm like, things will never change, but I trust the process. I've got the right community. And like you said, I love that just one foot in front of the other. And it's kind of life too, right? It's just this beautiful journey, ups and downs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Maggie, it has been so much fun having you on the podcast. Where can people find you online so they can continue being in your world?
Yeah, so it's Maggie the dietitian, Maggie with a Y, dietitian spelled like dietitian, pretty much everywhere on my website, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. So I love to for my online presence to deliver value and really good content. And so if you go on my website, I have a resource or a blog section with tons of cool, things that can help you on your journey. On my Instagram and TikTok, there's some really educational videos that I'll pull from clips. There's some like goofy, trendy stuff. So I try to just provide value in whatever that value could be for that person, whether it's getting a laugh, it's getting knowledge, it's getting resource, it's getting this tip, and just trying to provide value in the way that someone may stumble across my online presence.
Yeah. So your website, Maggie the Dietitian, I know you kind of directed me to. If you're there, you click on or you hover over dietitians and you go down to shop, and you do have a lot of resources available for dietitians who I know I've seen, like you got some little master classes. I know that you have some downloads courses. I know that you have your dietitian business networking community. So
Uh-huh.
I would just encourage anyone who wants to learn more to go to Maggie's website, Maggie the Dietitian, and wealth of resources on that website.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Maggie. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me. I hope this was a great listen to and talk. I had a fun time hanging out, and I hope to chat with you again about other side hustle things.
For sure. For sure. Well, thank you for being on. And for all of our listeners, thank you for listening. And we'll see you all next week on the podcast.